O'Reilly!
You've got questions? O'Reilly Auto Parts has answers. Need a pro you can trust? We've got that too. No matter what you need, our professional parts people have the training and expertise to help you do things right. Deep automotive knowledge, just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Attention Talking Simpsons listeners, we have a new podcast miniseries exclusively on Patreon right now.
For $5 and up subscribers at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons, you get Talk King of the Hill Season 2, Part 1.
That's right, we're returning to King of the Hill once again, putting out 11 new episodes covering the first half of the show's second season. Again, that is patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. Be there or be not right.
Cartoons from present in the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What a Cartoon, where all cops are lizards. I'm one of your hosts, He-Dragon Bob Mackey, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever. Who is here with me today?
Hey, it's Henry Gilbert, and I promise you my computer password is not Pumpkin.
And today's episode is the Savage Dragon episode, She-Dragon.
Still no idea what the merchandise is.
Not a clue, but it must be important. Super freaks like these don't work for just anybody.
In today's
He's
episode,
calling us Super Freaks, Bob.
Super Freaks, I think they landed on that title on purpose, didn't they?
Yeah, I think so.
But today's episode is brought to us by a patron.
Yes, premium patron James chose this episode, who says, I was a diehard fan of this comic as a teen, and I think that the cartoon is an interesting, if not very good, example of how a slightly edgy, somewhat mature comic should not be adapted for the small screen. Also, I feel that this is one that, if I don't request it, it'll never get a chance in hell of being talked about by anyone ever again.
Well, I don't see why.
Yeah,
It's so delightful.
It is completely a forgotten series, though in my research of this, finding its compatriots that were on the channel, there's actually more obscure shows that it aired alongside. But yeah, until very recently, which we'll talk about, Savage Dragon was not readily available to anybody. It was a lost animated show.
And now it's very available on Office Plus, otherwise known as Peacock.
Yeah, the Dragon and a Peacock, match made in heaven. Yeah.
Do you know what? When I was watching this on Peacock, there were no ads.
They have some stuff on there that they're like, we'll not even monetize this with ads. If you want to watch this, have it. Like, though, well, did you connect your Comcast account to Peacock?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought that might be why I got no ads. There was like a certain tier level of when I watch the show The Young Rock on Peacock, I did get ads, but
Well, Comcast is bad. I have Xfinity.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
It's the same thing.
But yeah, if you haven't yet Googled it, I say this to you, listener, if you are sadly trapped being an Xfinity account user in a monopolized town like we are, then you do have a Peacock account. You can just link to Comcast, and that's why I refuse to say Xfinity, because that's trying to rebrand. But if you use that, you just Google like Connect account, and you technically have the $5 a month version of Peacock as part of being an Xfinity user.
You have hours and hours of Steve Carell-based entertainment waiting for you.
But with ads.
With ads.
And if you want to pay $5 more, well, then you won't have ads. But yeah, I thank James for picking this one, because I was like him when I was 11 or so, starting in 93. I was reading Savage Dragon pretty regularly too, as a comic book fan, because, you know, it was the cool and edgy thing to read Image, but also Eric Larson was one of my favorite Spider-Man comic artists as a kid. He was on Amazing Spider-Man and Spider-Man right after Todd McFarlane left either of those books, like 3 years apart. He pretty much was Todd McFarlane's cleanup act, and he's not as good as Todd McFarlane or as celebrated, but he is a quality comic artist who you can definitely see his passion for Spider-Man in the pages. So I read his Savage Dragon book until it got just a little too much for me, and I was like, I I was a child with an allowance, $2 whole for a Savage Dragon book. I didn't want that. And then this show, I maybe watched it once, accidentally finding out it was on the air, and I thought it wasn't very good in 1995 or 96 whenever I saw it, and kind of gave up on it. So, and now rewatching it again, I really appreciate the all-star voice cast, which will be clear in the clips. And mainly I just chuckle at poor animation, but it's not even that badly animated, I guess.
No, it was better than I thought it would be, but still not very good. And my experience with the Savage Dragon is, I was thinking about this on the walk over here. My relationship with comics is very strange in that I felt like once I moved out here, all of my adult friends grew up reading comic books, like superhero comics especially. For me, that wasn't the case. No kid that was my friend was reading comics. And I went to the comic book store for the first time because of the Max on MTV.
Yeah.
I wanted to read the comics it came from, and that's what got me into Image Comics. So the first comics I was reading were Image Comics and Bone. Jeff Smith's Bone. And then I would read manga in the late 90s. So like I missed superhero comics entirely. And when I was buying Image Comics, I didn't like the superhero-y ones. I liked the Max. I liked Spawn. But when I saw this on the shelf, I thought, this looks stupid.
Yes. Yeah.
And then I learned upon buying Max back issues, the Savage Dragon and one of his enemies is in the Max, but they took that out of the MTV version because they didn't want to pay for it. So
that's right.
It's a much improved version is on MTV. But yeah, Savage Dragon and the Max had a brief crossover in that early Image time in which they were always crossing over.
We talked about that when we did the Max What a Cartoon, but I forgot that Mako, who is a lead character in this episode.
Yeah, one of the Street Sharks makes an appearance.
He's the guy who fought Max for a whole comic. Well, when Image Comics started up, originally the creators were like, well, my character will be in your book and my character will be in your book. But then just 2 or 3 years later, when it came time to license things, they're like, oh, shit, I put a character in here I can't license into a cartoon. What am I supposed to do? And a lot of them, like McFarlane as well, had to just make up new people to be like the biggest one I remember was in Spawn. There was a big reveal of like who was the guy who killed Spawn. And it was a character named Chapel who was in Youngblood. So Rob Liefeld owned him. And then by the time the movie came out in 97, they were not friends, and he made up a new character to have killed Spawn instead of Chapel.
I forgot about Chapel. Yeah, so I just never really grew up with superheroes, and it was especially alienating in the late 2000s when all the Marvel movies were coming out, and like everybody I know was like, oh, my favorites, they're on the screen. Yay! And even my wife grew up reading superhero comics, but I didn't, and I feel so out of touch when it comes to certain topics like these.
I do chuckle that now you are a Spider-Man film viewer.
I've seen most of them now.
Yeah, at last we can talk about Spider-Man together. Yeah, I think a lot of people in our age group, especially young boys in America, had a similar thing to me of like starting about in 1990. That's when the comic boom was starting. And for me, I did know lots of cool kids, or I guess actually a real big one that got me into reading Image books. I was already reading the Spider-Man stuff, but then in 92, in 93, I spent the summer at a day camp for the YMCA, which I do not recommend. It was very bad. A lot of awful kids who bullied me. But the nice thing there was one of the counselors, I guess you'd say. He was a guy in his early 20s who every week would be like, look at the new Spawn, man. I brought it here. And look at the new Savage Dragon. Isn't this cool, man?
Don't touch it.
Yeah, he would show it to us. And I don't blame him for not touching it. If one of us got our hands on it, he'd never get it back.
You throw it right in the pool.
So yeah, I think that was like James reading it as a teen. For all of us, Savage Dragon was part of the mix, and it was attractive to me because it's like this big green dude on the cover, and then you go inside of it and he's beating the shit out of people all the time, covered in blood. The first issue of the ongoing series, he's fighting a giant rat man, and to fight him effectively, he comes in with 2 chainsaws that he uses like boxing gloves and punches him with chainsaws, and there's just blood everywhere.
I recalled a weird memory in that around that time, the 90s, when I was reading Spawn and Bone and just weirdo things, I was still reading Wizard cover to cover because I thought it was important to know about the other things I wasn't reading. So I still have retained a lot of knowledge that way, but I never had firsthand experience.
Yeah, the Wizard was must read for me every month too, and like the Image guys very smartly were like, we'll give you tons of shit, Wizard. Like, you cover us. It's kind of comparable to like how you hear these stories in America that Nintendo was very withholding, but as the Genesis was getting big, Sega was like, we will give any publisher anything if they want it.
You're right. Wizard had a lot of cool pack-ins. Like, I believe Bone and the Max had mini comics packed in that were unique to Wizard.
That's right. Yeah, that actually, I have to credit a very good YouTube channel called Cartoonist Kayfabe, where it's two comic creators / comic fans who are super into the books I read growing up, and they are kind of like us in that they go page by page and go like, hey, look at that. And they talk about like actual technique, or they know the publishers' names, and they talk about all this history. I learned a ton from that. And if you were a Wizard reader, watch their ones about Wizard, because they just go page by page through Wizard and they deconstruct and go like, oh, they're talking about this because they made a deal with this guy, or because his parents own this comic shop. And the reason they did all those mini comics was to get your fucking address so they could sell it to other people.
That's perfect. I recalled another stupid memory. This is the last one, by the way, in which I was also reading the collectible card game spin-off magazine. I think it was called Inquest.
Yes.
Although I never played any of them.
Wow.
I just wanted to know about them. What was wrong with me? I was like Principal Skinner's mother in the Book of Cakes.
I read Toy Fair without really being a toy collector at that time too, but that was mainly because I, as an immature young man, I really enjoyed reading the comics that would grow into Robot Chicken.
Yeah, that's right.
Which, if I were to read them now, I would be certainly embarrassed to have loved them. But you know, the late 90s, we were all stupid dummies, okay? I'm sorry. But it was good to reminisce about all this stuff, because to really understand how this cartoon came to be, you do have to really immerse yourself in the hugeness of the early 90s American comic book boom. So for this, let's first talk about Erik Larsen, the creator of Savage Dragon, who loves Savage Dragon. He's Savage Dragon's biggest fan. If you look at pictures of him next to Savage Dragon, the dragon's face is his face. They are the same person, and he's been drawing him since he was a child. And I just watched a recent interview with Larsen where he talks about, like, I just draw. I don't even make outlines. I just go like, I know the story I want to tell, and I just like, this would be cool. I'll draw this cool thing. And he just makes comics for himself that he also happens to publish and sell to a good base of people, like a still dependable, successful, profitable comic.
Erik Larsen is a very Viking style name.
Yes, yeah. Also, you can see why Finhead got his fin, because like Larsen is a very bald man, and so you can just, if you just draw a fin on his head, you're like, oh, that's Dragon. I mean, the original Dragon, not obviously his son Malcolm, who has been the lead character of Dragon comics for about a decade now.
I'll take your word for it.
But yeah, so Erik Larsen, born in 1962, Gen X boy in love with comic books, a father who collected a whole bunch of comic books, came up reading Marvel and DC in the 70s, and he wanted to make some of his own. He talks about since elementary school, he was drawing his own comics that he'd just hand out to friends and doing it on paper. He, a self-taught guy, I believe, didn't go to any art schools, but just loved comic books. And in elementary school, he also created his favorite personal creation character, an OC, Don't Steal. Like, if he had DeviantArt, he'd have been drawing Dragon back then and putting it on there of like, OC, Don't Steal. Like, before kids had Sonic characters to create their own creations around, he's like, I want Dragon to be, I'll draw Spider-Man and Superman, and there's Dragon right there hanging out with him.
What if the Hulk was a lizard cop?
Well, he wasn't a cop at first. He was a secret agent. The show is Copagandra, by the way. We'll just get that out of the way. Yes, but
it's true.
But yeah, so he loved drawing this huge green dude who punched people. And by his early 20s, as he was starting to go pro in the world of comics, he got connected with some other folks who helped him self-publish in a way that he would own, which really future-proofed it for him. In 1982, self-published his first Dragon adventure, where if you look at the original drawing of Dragon, his fin is not the cool, big, tall fin he has. It's more of like a bump on his head. It's like the fin that Michael Rooker's character Yondu had in Guardians of the Galaxy 1.
If I was a criminal, I would aim for the big fin. It looks like it hurts if you just perforate that. It's like, oh, my fin.
I hate to say I know this, but Larsen actually got asked that a lot in the early days of Dragon comics. He answered that it was like your ear. It's like, there's no pain receptors in his fin, so you can screw it up, and he's got a healing factor that puts it back. Okay. So Eric Larson, when he was doing the Savage Dragon comics, he would do like 8-page, possibly as filler, but 8-page letters to the editor sections. Like he would reply to everybody. He loved talking with his audience.
So many Image books were like that. I hate to go back to the Max again, but that was a mega huge letter section in which at times the letter section would be bigger than the comic because Sam Keith had a problem putting out pages sometimes.
Those were like the forum boards of their days too, of like this, before you had Twitter to talk to your favorite comic artist, you could just wait and they'd probably reply to one of your letters back then. But yeah, so by the mid-90s, Larson, who'd been working in, some self-published stuff, but self-publishing was actually pretty, very few people actually made money on it in the 80s back then. You needed to go pro at Marvel or DC, really, if you wanted to make some money. Though also in that self-publishing era, he befriended a couple guys named Eastman and Laird.
Oh,
so
future billionaires.
He knew the TMNT guys before TMNT was created. But so Larson, in the mid 80s and getting into the late 80s, he started getting work at DC and then Marvel. He worked on Punisher and Doom Patrol, and he was starting to come up at a time where superstar artists were becoming a big thing, especially at Marvel. For decades at Marvel, there was a very specific house style that you weren't supposed to deviate from. So even though there were lots of people who could draw different ways, Spider-Man always had to look a certain way. That was the rules. But guys like Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee really pushed against that. They're like, well, I know the X-Men always were drawn that way, but no, I'm going to draw it this way. And as they started to get a more unique to themselves style that was way out there and definitely bombastic, is if you as a comic reader love storytelling or clarity of dialogue, well, that's not what those artists were for.
They're mainly for just drawing a ton of lines on a page.
Yeah, and the coolest stuff of oh man, Spider-Man, he shoots a bunch of webs and it's like a spaghetti plate of webs everywhere. Then he punches a dude and it's these just awesome action poses. Storytelling was very secondary to cool poses.
I was looking at a lot of the early Savage Dragon art, and it just every sinew is realistically detailed, and there are frankly too many muscles on an arm.
Yeah,
but
and
anatomy goes out the window on these drawings, by the way.
Well, and you talk about the lines like a dragon has hairy arms.
Yeah.
He's got some hairy arms because he's a man.
He's all man, baby.
He's all man. But yeah, so Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, all these guys building up their names in Marvel Comics and honestly getting bigger than the stars themselves. People were buying X-Men comics not to see the new adventures of Wolverine in some cases, but to see the cool new thing Jim Lee drew. A Todd McFarlane Spider-Man book sold way more than the ones he didn't draw. And Larson was coming up at the same time, and he got the biggest gig Marvel could really have handed anybody at that time, which is Todd McFarlane leaves Amazing Spider-Man, and the guy who follows him is Eric Larson. So that made him a megastar. And Eric Larson's Spider-Man books were some of the first comics I ever read. So I loved his stuff. He draws a great Spider-Man. Human faces are not his strongest suit. So when you have a guy like Spider-Man who doesn't have a nose or a mouth, he really gets to show off his figure work in dynamic action. His issue 250 of Amazing Spider-Man, I read till it fell apart. It's where Spider-Man fights Dr. Doom, and it was just really cool. I liked it a lot. And in 1991, Larson also followed Todd McFarlane on Todd McFarlane's next Spider-Man book. And so he was already man, I'm going to be a huge superstar. But then in 1991, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson, Whilce Portacio, and Jim Valentino all decide together that they are fed up with Marvel. They're not getting paid half of what they're owned. Marvel had just gone public in the stock market, and it was making some people really rich. And those some people were not the artists that were super popular. And so McFarlane is the recognized leader of that group. He was just going to quit on his own, but then he actually talked to the other guys and convinced them to quit alongside him to start their own company. That company would be Image Comics, a huge, it's hard to overstate if you don't know American comics history, to have a third publisher show up that actually challenged DC and Marvel for dominance, that never had happened in America. And an independent one where all the creators own their own work. Guys like Larson had grown up where their heroes, Jack Kirby, were publicly fucked out of every dollar they could have made. Like, Jack Kirby deserved to be a billionaire instead of struggling to get by as he went into an early grave at 60 from overwork.
There is an early issue of Spawn that is awkwardly all about this.
Yes, yep, yeah, it is very ham-fisted, but as I will say, as a 10-year-old, that issue of Spawn really got to me. I was like, oh, these poor creators.
When Spawn teams up with Cerebus the Aardvark to learn about copyright law.
Yep, that's the one.
It is so weird. I have that comic somewhere still.
And since then, Dave Sim went crazy and is a crazy misogynist. But anyway, the creator Cerebus. But so Larson is in the group at Image Comics. He actually works for Marvel a little longer than everybody else because he wanted to finish his run on Spider-Man. But after that, he launches along with Image Comics in 1992. Finally reviving his self-insert character, the Savage Dragon. First with a 3-issue miniseries, which is kind of the style of what it would end up being. But then when it becomes an ongoing in 93, that's when it's like, this is a buff cop who fights freaks. That's their name for superpowered beings, freaks. All in a grounded-ish Chicago, fighting a growing list of enemies alongside his mentor Frank, his partner Alex, a love interest named Rapture, who's not in this show, but she's an electric lady who is drawn with like an insane body. I'll just say that too. So the thing about Erik Larsen is that he would say openly, if you asked him, yes, these are self-indulgent comics. I draw comics for me that I want to see that involve giant men beating the shit out of each other, and then a hot girl shows up and you can see her nipples through her shirt. That's what he wants to draw.
That's most Image Comics of this era.
But he was even more on the nose. Like, I swear, like but actually, yeah, you're right. All of them drew like, I think we're all asking their bosses, like, what's the closest to a nipple I can draw? Like, if I actually draw a nipple, then it can't be sold in Walmart. So fine. What's the closest I can get?
How many millimeters can be poking through the t-shirt before this is illegal?
What about 3 pubic hairs just above the line? What about that? But
how much of the vagina bone can I see?
But yes, I mean, that I reread just flipping through it, the first 20 issues of Savage Dragon, and I remembered it all. It all came back to me as I read it, like, yeah, I remember that. And there is like a crazy issue, I believe it's issue 8, where he fights his ultimate villain, Overlord, and it's every page is a 1-page splash page. It basically is the Milhouse joke of saying, well, he gets killed on every page. It's that kind of crazy violence. Then, like 2 issues later, there's a 4-page spread of him having sex with Rapture.
Well, you need that.
that looks straight out of the Top Gun film sex scene.
I guess so. Do we know about his politics, Erik Larsen? Because it feels really telling that he made this character a cop immediately after the LA riots.
Yeah.
And in that kind of culture in which we were a bit too freaked out about street crime and street gangs and the racialization of that.
I mean, yeah, if you really want to parse through too, I will say it hit me that in the comic, a little more show than the show, all freaks are bad unless they become a cop. Like, there's actually, in the original line of it, it seems to say there are freaks and there's cops, and a couple freaks can be taught to be law-abiding, but the rest are crazy and need to be beaten horribly. So, yeah, I think you can extrapolate that from that. So I will say with Larson, my personal read on his politics is centrist Democrat who is also like in his late 50s now and he has a lot of blind spots. But I will say that, like, he had Obama be a lead character in a few comics, and he is a pro-Obama guy. During the Trump administration, he drew things about how Trump sucked on the cover of his comic. Last year, he had the current Savage Dragon endorse Biden and Harris. So, but also, like, wouldn't he like Biden? He's tough on crime too, you know. But
and he's not on Twitter, I'm guessing, right?
He actually was for a time, and I think he's one of those guys who, like. So, look, there's much more reactionary dudes in comics out there. I don't think Larson is as much that, but if you did ask him, like, hey, what do you think of current comics? He'd say, I don't read current comics. I don't like them. Like, so that's my read on him. But, yeah, I'd say he's a centrist Democrat. That'd be my guess. There's definitely tons of stuff in here that you're like, oh, that's kind of sus. But there's also stuff like he did write a gay character into his comics before a lot of other people were doing it. Like,
it was also 30 years ago, too.
Yeah, it was 30 years ago. But so, yes, he was doing Savage Dragon, and Savage Dragon, I would say, was as a successful book. Definitely was making him a lot of money. but my remembrance as a kid talking with other kids then was that it was maybe the 5th most popular Image book, because you had Spawn, Youngblood, and Wildcats kind of fighting for the top 3. And then after that, you had Mark Silvestri's like Cyberforce, which I think that was more popular than Dragon. And then you got Dragon in 5th. But if you're 5th in a thing that all sells 1 million, you're still doing pretty good. But yeah, I don't think Savage Dragon was many people's favorite. But what it was the most consistent, as all the other guys got either distracted by new deals, too much money, cocaine. Meanwhile, Eric Larson was like, I am putting out a comic on time and on schedule. Like, he worked really hard on that.
I respect that, because as a reader of Spawn, it was basically going from Todd McFarlane, art and story and dialogue. Then it went, Todd McFarlane's going to just do the inking and writing all the dialogue. Now Todd is not going to do the inking or the penciling, but he's going to do the story. Now Todd is making money off the comic, and you won't see him again for a long time.
He's now an editor. He's now a guy who can give a thumbs up to, like, sure, do that in Spawn. I don't care. Like, yeah, I mean, Savage Dragon, I do think a lot of its success was that if you were a kid who was sick of waiting for the new issue of Youngblood to come out, Savage Dragon's there all the time. You're like, well, I could just read Savage Dragon. That's Image. It's cool too. But his stories, like, they were all the same kind of slugfest. Like, and they were a very traditional 70s style comic book. They were the comic books he read as a kid, except as a kid, he wished it was bloodier and had more boobs. And so he drew that. But yeah, so it was selling so well in the comic book boom that was happening at the same time as the Batman and X-Men cartoons and toys were selling a whole bunch. It only makes sense that the Hollywood would come a call-in for the new big comic books and try to make deals with them. And so all of the Image founders were trying to get cartoons going. They were working with different places. The first person to get a cartoon was Jim Lee. He got Wildcats on CBS.
I have the theme song for that in my head, although I never watched it. Our brains are cursed, I swear.
It was a Nelvana production. I remember it looking okay, and they had a run of toys. Meanwhile, Youngblood actually was the first to get a pilot film made, but I have a feeling I've only learned so much about it. That feels like it's a whole other thing, but it sounds like Rob Liefeld found a guy who's like, I just founded my own company. I'll make a bunch of cartoons with you, man. And they made a 3-minute pilot, and then it all fell apart.
Oh, so animated pilot or live action?
It's an animated pilot. Yeah, you can find
Wow.
it. And it doesn't look bad. It doesn't look bad. It looks better animated than this. And so, 94, you got Wildcats. Early 1995, you get the Max that airs on MTV. And then Savage Dragon would be next on the USA Network. Though, I think it shows that taking your time ended up paying off in at least quality for Todd McFarlane. Well, actually, Max was much quality too, but the Spawn show was way better than Savage Dragon and Wildcats. So Todd McFarlane's work paid off more there. And he worked with he got Eric Radomski off of Batman. Like, he got the real Batman people to work on it.
It took a long time to get Spawn, though.
Well, also because he was uncompromising in that way that he wanted it to be on HBO so he could have it be as graphic as his comic book. Because the funniest thing is in comic books is that Savage Dragon could be sold to all ages. It was not a restricted book. You as a little child could get it off the shelf and buy it. But if you were to animate the things that are in Savage Dragon, it would only be able to be on HBO. Like, even if you didn't do actual nudity, just the amount of blood on the page in his books is insane.
I mean, some of the stuff they're even doing in this cartoon would not be cool today.
Oh, yeah.
On this kid's cartoon.
Yeah, totally. I mean, even thinking about like 1995, fists hit, a punch lands, like that. They got away with some stuff there. But Eric Larson makes a deal. He gets his own connections for an animated series. Not only that, but he also teams up with Playmates to even get some action figures going. I think partially because he has a friendship with Eastman and Laird. Like, issue 2 of Savage Dragon is a crossover with the Ninja Turtles.
No fucking way. Really?
Yes, yep. The
oh
turtles
my God.
show up in it. And they're the all red mask turtles because it had to officially be comic book turtles, not TV show turtles.
Henry, question for you. How many of these toys did you own?
Okay. So I didn't actually own any of the Dragon toys, but it came in a wave of figures that also included Ninja Turtles as designed by Jim Lee, and I did own those toys.
That was a good choice.
Yeah, but the saddest thing was Jim Lee redesigned all 4 turtles. They only made Donnie, Mikey, and Raph. Leo didn't get a turtle
Really?
toy in that set.
So even the toy line is acknowledging that he sucks.
That's what let me know that, I guess my favorite turtle's the least popular
I'm sorry,
one.
Henry, I didn't know that.
His swords are cool, man.
The swords are the best weapon. I agree.
And he's just trying to keep things together, He's got all these like guys who just want to be rude or party. He's trying to lead.
And I like Cam Clark.
Yeah, also he's my favorite voice. But yeah, so later Larson would admit that it was a mistake to give up so much creative freedom to just cast a check and make the cartoon. And he knew that it'd have to be changed a lot for the kids, but he accepted it. He was like, let's just do it. And also he would just be a creative consultant on the show. He didn't have an executive producer position. If you watched the Spawn show, you know that Todd McFarlane had a lot of power creatively on it too.
He is like the worst Rod Serling ever in that show. Boy, oh boy. We got to do that just to make fun of those intros.
I bought the DVDs in the hopes we'll do it someday. And so, though, who was the person writing that check? Well, now it's time to get into a bit of cartoon history we have not covered before on What a Cartoon, and that is America's USA Cable Network and the home of 80s cartoons that you and I both watched, the USA Cartoon Express.
That's why I experienced most of the extended Flintstones universe.
Yeah, it was home to so many Hanna-Barbera shows, and also they could get some other syndicated stuff too, but it was like 80% Hanna-Barbera. And yeah, so the USA Cartoon Express, which also, if you ever see a weird drawing of like, why are all these characters hanging out together on a train on Twitter? Those are from the commercials for it they got permission to like draw Pac-Man and Yogi Bear hanging out with the turtles. They were all on the USA Cartoon Express. And so yes, USA, one of the earliest American cable channels. And in 1982, it launched the USA Cartoon Express, the home of all of their cartoon stuff, which was big competition in the 80s for Nickelodeon. Like those would be, if I got to control the TV remote, I'd be swapping between those two in the daytime. I'd be, okay, it's Saturday afternoon. Is Cartoon Express showing something good? No. Okay, back to Nickelodeon. Oh,
Pinwheel.
Yes, yeah.
Who put this on?
And so the Cartoon Express had been going since 82, but all of their shows are mostly the kid-friendly stuff. They did have like GoBots on it, but it wasn't a lot of action. And then comes October 1992. USA Network, through its parent company MCA, had been trying to just buy Hanna-Barbera, but they got outbid by that wacky southerner Ted Turner. And so not only did they not get to own Hanna-Barbera, but Ted Turner in 1992 was planning on launching Cartoon Network, and the last thing he was going to let was USA Cartoon Express keep Hanna-Barbera cartoons on their channel.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. I never realized that's where the split happened, where Cartoon Express derailed because Cartoon Network started and the acquisition happened.
I mean, also the 90s, it was just changing in kids' taste. So I would figure even if they had kept all the Flintstone reruns, that generation of the 90s kids would not be as into those shows anyway.
No. I barely had patience for them to begin with.
They were always my backup if especially like Nicktoons were getting started in 91 as well. Even Doug was fresher and cooler than the musty old cartoons on USA Cartoon Express. The biggest hits they had at the time were Denver the Last Dinosaur and a bunch of Deke bullshit. But they also had Nicktoons Breathing Down Their Neck, which showed that like, original programming is needed on our cable networks. We can't just show kids a bunch of reruns.
But that costs money.
And money it would cost. As Variety would report in 1993, USA programming head Dave Kennan said he wanted to develop new characters for the network that would give the cable web an identity. Originally, USA planned to debut new characters as part of its Cartoon Express wraparounds and then launch them as part of a later series. This time, however, the new characters are going straight to series. So as part of a giant investment in original programming that major cable networks were all being forced to do. Like, the USA did have limited original programming, but I mean, it was 93 when Duckman launched as well, right?
Yeah, there was such limited programming. I think like Silk Stockings was one of their shows, but it was mostly like all cable stations, mostly reruns.
Yeah.
Mostly movies that no one else wanted to show.
Yeah, it's funny that USA in the morning was old Hanna-Barbera reruns, and then at night it was the edited for television like softcore porn movies.
And of course USA Up All Night, as you're mentioning.
All night, yes. Yeah. Duckman was the transition from regular programming to the dirty stuff at night.
Here comes the filth kids.
Yeah, but PG-13 filth, because again, it's you don't. If you could afford Cinemax, you'd be watching it, but you can't, so you got to settle. But anyway, so Canon is looking to increase USA's original output, so he okays a bunch of cartoons. Unfortunately, though, he then is gone from the network by 94, but he already signed the deals, so they're happening. And he sets up Universal Cartoon Studios, which will start making their own original stuff. The first two are really lost to time, and they're not even dumped on Peacock. Problem Child and Itsy Bitsy Spider Show.
Yeah, we were talking about this beforehand, and I do recall there was a really good Itsy Bitsy Spider cartoon before either the first or second Problem Child movie, and then they decided to spin that off into a series, which sounds like a mistake to me.
It was not very popular at all and just went one season, and Problem Child at least got 2 seasons. And
Gilbert Gottfried, he took the job. He will not turn down a job.
Oh, no way. Well, I also remember Problem Child had an animated opening. Even as a kid, I didn't particularly like Problem Child, but I did like that it had a cartoon of a child being a problem.
Let's bring those back. Animated openings in live action movies.
Yes, yeah.
Let's do it.
You know, the Birds of Prey movie did have it when they gave Harley's background. It actually was a cartoon.
I like it.
That was 1993. 1994, they launched a Highlander animated series, which tied into the live-action Highlander show, which was one of the USA's first original programmings. And then in 1995, they're seeing the writings on the wall for the Cartoon Express, so they're like, we need to spin this off to a different thing. Get away from that Cartoon Express branding. So they make up the branding of the Action Extreme Team.
It's better than a dumb old train.
Yeah, this is a team who's action. So they decide they are going to get 2 shows that they'll partner it with and then pay for their first 2 original action shows.
Oh, some of these are some real Matt McMuscles favorites.
Oh, yeah. I'm surprised he hasn't done Dragon yet, actually, our friend Matt McMuscles, but their programming was amazing. They knew that kids are watching Saturday morning up to 11, but they might start peeling off at 11, and then they could get people at noon. So starting October 21st, 1995, somebody get on that Savage Dragon wiki. It's wrong. It says it starts in September. It started October. Anyway, they would have a lead-in of an hour of WWF Pro Wrestling. Then it would go to the syndicated but owned by Universal Exo Squad series, which I'd also like to do that one in the future.
I recall seeing that syndicated, not on USA.
Yes, yeah. So it was syndicated first, but now it was part of the Action Extreme team like a year later. And then they get Wildcats. They get the reruns of Wildcats. And then goes into 2 brand new shows, Street Fighter, yes, yeah, and Savage Dragon.
Wow, okay. Classics of this era.
Well, if you watch the Savage Dragon show and then watch Street Fighter one, you're like, oh, Savage Dragon is the better looking show by far.
It really is.
Just look up our friend Matt McMuscle's many classic videos of the many inconsistencies in Street Fighter. and so, yeah, Savage Dragon premieres as part of the Action Extreme team. By season 2, it'll be partnered with 2 more original programming slots. Mortal Kombat and Wing Commander, 2 more video game shows.
Wing Commander, I've never seen that cartoon. I find it inexplicable that they made it. Mortal Kombat, when that aired on TV, I was a little too old for it, but I also thought, how did they make this a kid's cartoon?
Yeah, well, they made it boring. That's how. And sort of G.I. Joey, but yeah, I will say at least those had better quality animation. And Dragon got its animation more sorted out by season 2 as well. But the Mortal Kombat Defenders of the Realm, a crappy show that's also lost to time. So that's the reason I think Savage Dragon is on there and these others aren't, because an Exo Squad's on Peacock as well, because the others are licensed shows, so they have to negotiate it with Warner or Capcom or whoever owns Wing Commander. EA, I guess?
Maybe.
Yeah, but
maybe they do now.
It was such a weird thing that Wing Commander got to be hot for 2 years and then get all of this shit after it was ice cold.
And a movie, too.
Yes.
That rotten movie.
Starring Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard, Shaggy and Freddie in a movie way beforehand. Yeah, those 2 were the Laurel and Hardy of our childhoods. Those 2. No, they were the Martin and Lewis of our childhood.
I mean, this is off topic, but the appeal of Wing Commander for PC gamers in the early 90s was, what if Luke Skywalker wasn't more Star Wars?
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what you got.
If you got to see a postage stamp sized picture of Mark Hamill, that was the same as a movie back then. So production notes on the show are basically nil. I had to just dig through people's like LinkedIn's and IMDb's. Nobody does interviews about this except for Eric Larson. And Eric Larson just says, yeah, it sucked. I didn't like it. And I cashed a check. Like, that's all he says about it. I'm going to name a bunch of people, and none of them I could find did interviews about it. But yes, the story of this show also is American voice actors and Canadian everything else.
Oh boy, the voice acting in this show is very good, and they're having a lot of fun, especially Jim Cummings.
Oh yeah. It's so art director for the full series was the very Canadian named Gord McBride.
Gord, oh yes, I love it.
There's 2 Gords who worked on this show in high positions.
Too many Gords.
But yeah, Gord McBride. He previously worked on What a Cartoon classics like Eek the Cat, Street Sharks, Brothers Grunt, a Vancouver-based artist. He also worked on some of the earliest Ren and Stimpy's and the Ren and Stimpy Super NES game, Vidiots.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And he was layout supervisor for 5 episodes of Mission Hill, actually.
Okay.
And also lots of Canadian things that I don't recognize by name. Gord's most recent credit is If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, a 2018 adaptation.
Oh, why did they do that?
They have to let people know that you can't give money to parasites like these rats who want cookies. They keep wanting more and more.
I mix that up with Who Stole My Cheese.
What is that? Isn't that like a management book or something?
I think it's like when you get laid off, it's just like, well, your cheese wasn't taken away. You just got to find new cheese.
Oh,
I think it was just a way to, push the blame off of poor management.
What a cursed society we live in. Hey, anyway, most of the other art credits just fly by, and they're not episode specific except for director. And it's all very poorly cataloged on IMDb too, as well, I will say. Season 1 directors are buried in the credits, though I did look up the director of this specific episode. Season 2 has the same director for every episode, Craig Wilson, who mainly has storyboard credits. Worked on a lot of Marvel and DC tunes, and his most recent credit is another revival I didn't know about of Superbook from a few years ago.
No way.
Yep. Superbook came back, Bob, but now it's a cheap-looking kid CG show. The only reason we ever watched Superbook was because it was anime in the 80s.
It was Anime Jesus.
And yes, the voice cast are the real superstars here. You've got Jim Cummings in the lead role as Dragon, Kath Soucie as his partner Alex, Tony Jay as the evil overlord, and so many great voice actors like Rob Paulson, Jeff Bennett, Cree Summer, Peter Cullen, and a young Jennifer Hale, like one of her earliest roles in this. Not to mention like pretty famous people, at least in the nerd culture of Star Trek, Deep Space Nine's Renee Auberjonois, Mark Hamill, the previously mentioned Mark Hamill, Dave Coulier.
No way.
Ruth Buzzy. They did voices on this.
Jim Cummings is playing a gruff cop, much like in Bonkers, and he's maybe 20% different than Lucky Piquel in his voice work here. So I'm wondering when Bonkers is going to show up. Bonkers.
I didn't make the Bonkers connection. Oh my God.
He's buff Lucky Piquel.
It was not weighed down by that annoying family of his. Yeah.
I guess She-Hulk. Oh, sorry, it's not She-Hulk. She-Dragon in this.
Yes, come on,
is
Bob.
Bonkers. Right?
You're right. Wow. This is an episode of Bonkers we're doing. You're right.
Thank you, James.
Well, actually, I think it's very similar to Earthworm Jim with most of the same cast. I wouldn't be surprised if they just recorded, at least one day, they recorded in Earthworm Jim. They're like, everyone stick around. We're doing Savage Dragon right after.
Dan, you're too expensive. Go home.
Yes, Dan, we can't afford you. Jim, you're the lead now. But I mean, they really did spend money on real actors. Like comparatively at the time, the X-Men show, which has a great cast, but they did choose to be cheaper and get the Canadian voice cast instead of an LA voice cast. So there were different choices made back then. But yeah, I think it's actually pretty similar to Earthworm Jim, which we talked about on a Retronauts last year. Is that the Earthworm Jim cartoon had this big budget on the U.S. side, but then tightened belts as much as they could on any other part of the production done internationally. Voice director on it is Gordon Hunt, another Gord. He did dozens and dozens of Hanna-Barbera shows. Worked also on previous What a Cartoon favorites Mighty Max and Captain Planet. So
yeah, Mighty Max feels like it was made in a similar factory, although they had better writing.
Yeah, and better animation that could at least, like, the darkness could cover for any mistakes that couldn't be retaken.
But that is not as available as this.
Yeah, who owns that? It must be whoever bought Deke, who bought this, who bought the other thing. But
and then Mattel's involved in some way.
Oh yes, yeah. But so Gordon Hunt He would retire in the early aughts based on his IMDb credits. Sadly passed away 2016, though in the ripe old age of 87. So quite a life Gordon Hunt lived. Animation production, much like we talked about in Universal cartoon show Back to the Future, was all outsourced. Like Universal, I think they did have an internal theatrical group, but they did not have television.
Oh yeah, that was their first animated show, right?
Yeah,
and it was
so.
given to Colossal Pictures in the Bay Area to figure out.
Yeah, and you'd know it from the credit at the end of like that cartoon plane that like goes in front of the logo for Universal. But the actual production studio of season 1 was Lacewood Productions, Ottawa based. They had worked on a handful of the first season of Ren and Stimpy's, like they did Fire Dogs. I know that one.
So not their best work.
No, but they weren't the worst of the first season Ren and Stimpy studios. But Lacewood seemed to always be on very shaky ground. They'd shut down in like 2 years and then get bought by a company that conveniently was owned by similar people who owned Lacewood. One could say that it allegedly looks like a way of dodging debtors by constantly making new companies.
No, we're a new company now.
Yeah. Oh, your problems with Lacewood. They're not here anymore.
I didn't like him either. My name is Mr. Snrub.
So, unsurprisingly, with that kind of background, Lacewood did not stick around for season 2. They'd be replaced by the, I'd say a little better Vancouver-based Studio B Productions, who they did a lot of work for bigger Canada studios, Nelvana and Deke. They'd worked on What a Cartoon Subjects, Angry Beavers, Eek, Reboot, Street Sharks as well. In 2010, Studio B Productions became DHX, and now they got bought by Wild Brain, which are the same people who bought the Deke Library. It's a lot to unpack.
The Wild Brain empire is crazy. How much things they own. How many things they own, rather.
But their mistake in buying Deke, though, was that they bought it for Inspector Gadget, but otherwise, most of their other shows, they have to negotiate with like Sega or just sell it off like they did. All the Deke Ghostbusters stuff, they just sold it to Sony. They're like, you guys can have all this Ghostbusters. But so overseas production on it, meanwhile, was handled by ACOM, and I don't blame them for doing what they do with a fraction of the budget on this. The Variety article I read pointed out that, like, they didn't cite real numbers, but they snarkily said, like, no way is this getting the kind of budget that Rugrats or Ren and Stimpy gets. Like,
yeah, you
no
can
way.
see what ACOM does with The Simpsons if they're given enough money, and this is way different.
Yeah, so I don't blame ACOM for poor animation. And episode animation got a minor upgrade in season 2, but the biggest upgrade was 60 whole seconds of anime that they produced for it.
The classic American cartoon bait and switch.
Yes, it's such a lie. I wonder if they wanted that for season 2, but they couldn't get it or season 1. And by season 2, they're like, fine, we'll pay the $100,000 or whatever. I would bet more like $50,000 to this anime company to make a minute of good looking stuff for it. And it's not even, I'm saying good, like it's
good for what follows.
Yeah, it would be like a really good episode of a 1990s anime TV show or a B-level OVA.
Yeah.
Like it's that good. And not surprising it looks that good because it does come from a company with a good pedigree, APPP, which stands for Another Push Pin Program.
What's the other P for? It's a typo.
But they really had a lot of big hits in the late 80s, early 90s. They did Project A-ko. That was them. They did Robot Carnival. They did the first run of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures OVAs. They did Golden Boy.
Oh man, Golden Boy owns.
And they did a lot of support for shows. Like if you see their in between second key animation credits on some websites, you'll see they worked on kind of everything. Like an Evangelion episode here, a Full Metal Alchemist there.
And they did this on their lunch break.
Yes, yeah, totally. And also worth mentioning with Another Pushpin Program that they are credited for animating one of the first commercially released hentai videos. Cream Lemon is the name of it. So they've got a lot to their history, but they animated the only good-looking stuff in Savage Dragon. But what an opening! I love seeing how he smashes that motorcycle through the window, but then he's not behind it. He smashes through the wall instead.
In the first season opening, is that all clips?
Yeah, I think it's like 20 seconds new, 40 seconds clips. That's my guess. And one other funny side note on the show is that Savage Dragon was part of one of the weirdest and most complicated crossovers in animation history. In 1996, USA decided they wanted to do a crossover between all the Action Extreme Team shows, but they couldn't possibly find a way to actually allow Street Fighter characters to meet Mortal Kombat characters to meet Wing Commander characters.
Ooh, that'd be weird.
So they figured out a way to do it. They'd have a character named Warrior King, whose ability is to teleport between dimensions. He'd be voiced by Michael Dorn, and he's a real, the character is drawn to be, I guess you'd say, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Conan the Barbarian. That's what he looks like. And he just, if you watch one episode of Savage Dragon on here, you're like, oh, this guy Warrior King hangs out with him for a whole episode and then teleports away. And there's no end to his story.
So wait a minute. It's not a crossover. It's one new character being connective tissue.
Yes, but he experienced it the way it would have only worked one day of airing, but USA saw it as if you were a kid who started watching the first show in the order that it aired that day, you would see Warrior King appear in the first show, teleport away, appear in the next. Savage Dragon was part 2. Then he'd disappear. He'd appear in Wing Commander next, and then disappear, and then end his story in Mortal Kombat, teleporting between universes.
So for a lot of lucky little boys in 1996, it was the best day of their lives.
It finally paid off watching all those shows together. It was such a weird way of doing a crossover that technically wasn't a crossover. I guess Warrior King would be a character USA owned, and they were just okay with him being in all 4 shows.
That sounds like Kingdom Hearts, and Warrior King is Sora.
He is. You're right. But despite all those stunts like Warrior King, by 1996, it was all over for Savage Dragon. As Eric Larson would say, and I think this is a little covering, but it could be true, that Savage Dragon did fine in the ratings, but the whole block never did amazingly. And so it never really succeeded. And by late 1996, also, they had whole new management at USA, and they made the decision that, why are we doing kids shows?
Why are we doing Duckman? Get it all off the air.
Yes, it was also a big part of that too. They were figuring out what they wanted to be, and what they didn't want to be was trying to compete with Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network with kids shows. So they sliced it off, and they did notice, well, what's the biggest stuff we do? Well, Baywatch and other boob shows. Okay.
Did they get wrestling at that time too?
They did have wrestling.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. Which it's not coincidence that wrestling got a little sexier on WWF Raw at the time. La Femme Nikita, Baywatch, Silk Stockings, and all those other shows were getting big on the network. And so Savage Dragon got killed by a new deal that was starting all these more prestigious shows as cartoons were going away. And so it aired for the last time in 1998, and that was it. They never got official DVDs. Eric Larson complained that he'd go to cons and see guys selling bootlegs of his show because it never got released, and it would piss him off. You'd see some episodes on YouTube, but otherwise nobody cared to remember it. But that all changed thanks to the monolithic Comcast company deciding to launch their own streaming service.
So for 22 years, it was just unavailable. Really?
Yep. Yeah.
God.
Just nowhere officially. Maybe in other regions, but I don't think so. But funnily enough, I think Comcast was like, what is everything we could possibly add? Because it's about just pure dump of content to just say well, Peacock has 8 million hours of whatever stuff. So they dug out Savage Dragon along with shows like Exo Squad and the Felix the Cat show they produced with Film Roman. But No Problem Child or Itsy Bitsy Spider, they're not in there. But that's where it lives now. And I'll give the final word to Eric Larson on this one, reflecting on it in 2020 after it appears in Peacock. The cartoon was something of an exercise in frustration for me, as I didn't have anywhere near the control that I would have liked to have had, he told comicbook.com. There were times, for example, when I was asked for input and then overruled. There was a number of people who tried out for Savage Dragon's voice, and the guy I picked wasn't ultimately chosen for the job. Jim Cummings was fine, and I'm told he loved voicing the character, but it wasn't what I had in mind. There were numerous things like that along the way, choices which needed to be made where I was consulted but didn't get the final say, and it was really a case of too many cooks spoil the broth. There were a lot of really talented people involved, but they were all tripping over each other to some extent, and what ultimately resulted wasn't everything I thought it could be.
I want to say Eric was probably busy doing his damn job.
He was, yeah. He didn't. I bet they could have told him, like, well, if you want to be super involved, take 3 months off from your comic book and we can talk. And he's like, never.
I mean, when the Spawn cartoon was on HBO, I don't even think, I think Todd McFarlane was completely divorced from the artistic side of Spawn. I think he was just writing the comic at that point.
Totally, yeah. And I mean, he couldn't have launched all those action figures himself either if he hadn't done that. Like, you only have so much time as a creative person, and Larson, you know, he made his choice. He's like, I want to be the guy who draws Savage Dragon. I can't give it to somebody else. It's my book.
And he was making, I mean, the comic book is a product to be sold, but for the most part, the TV show was a commercial for toys.
Yes, yeah.
And I guess he wasn't as into that part of the operation as he was in making his own art.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, it wasn't a good enough launching pad for his toys. Those Playmate toys didn't sell very well. They're very weird looking. They're giant hunks of plastic. They don't look like traditional Turtles toys. They actually have crazy proportions to them. Like, those turtle toys, you could really hurt your brother with them if you just smacked him with it. These newer turtles.
Could you cut someone up with that crazy fin?
You know, I bet that fin bends a lot. I bet it's I bet it's a tough one to keep.
It's
safe.
made of soft fabric.
But yes, Eric Larson, 25 years later, still draws the Savage Dragon comic, and he works on it to this day. He's drawn, I think, every issue. There's side books he writes, but other people draw, but he still does it and hasn't stopped. And he wants to, in that same interview, he's like, oh, I'd love to make a revival of it or do Savage Dragon right. But it's a niche series with a limited audience. And the thing about making a comic so much personally for him is that really does have a ceiling on popularity, and I don't think it'll ever be popular. Spawn can at least go like, hey, remember Spawn? And people actually do go, yeah, I remember Spawn. I'd like more Spawn. You can't really do that with Savage Dragon.
It's very sweet that he's able to do this for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
I like it.
And he actually lives near us, too. I believe he lives in the Bay Area.
Let's pound down his door.
But yes, that's the story of both Savage Dragon, the character, and the animated series. When we come back, we're going to talk about the 6th episode of Season 1, She-Dragon.
USA has action to the extreme. Watch out for a team of evil busters in Street Fighter. And get ready for the crime fighter with scales, Savage Dragon.
I can take the heat.
Brand new to the USA Action Extreme team. Saturday at 12.
Dragon got your tongue?
Maybe, because USA's own fire-breathing crime fighter is standing by. Savage Dragon.
I think I can take the heat.
USA Action Extreme team, Sunday mornings at 11:30.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the break for the What a Cartoon episode all about the Savage Dragon. I am one of your hosts, Bob Mackey, and I think the only big green monster in this room is Envy. And who is here with me today?
And hey, it's owner of Savage Dragon #1, Volume 2, Henry Gilbert.
And this episode is brought to you by one of our premium patrons, James. And if you want to be one of those patrons and get all these episodes 1 week at a time and ad-free, please go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. Sign up at the $5 level, you'll get just that, but also access to everything behind the $5 paywall. That includes over 100 bonus podcasts, so if you like listening to our voices, there is so much you haven't heard if you're not on the Patreon. And the most recent miniseries we're doing behind the paywall is Talking of the Hill Season 2 Part 1. That's 11 new episodes of Talking of the Hill, our King of the Hill retrospective series. We also have things like Talking Futurama, Talking Mission Hill, and Talking Critic, interviews, and so much more waiting for you just for patrons behind the paywall at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons. And we have a $10 level as well. If you sign up for that, you get all the $5 stuff, but also access to one mega-long podcast once a month, only for patrons of that level or higher.
Yes, Bob is talking about the What a Cartoon movie podcast. You probably have seen the previews every month in your free feed, but you are missing out if you don't sign up at that $10 level to get not only all the $5 things Bob just mentioned, but the What a Cartoon movie. For instance, last month you would have heard us talk about DuckTales the movie Treasure of the Lost Lamp for over 3.5 hours. And this month, if you like this big green animal we're talking about in this episode, I think you're going to enjoy us talking about the 20th anniversary of Shrek How good is it these days? Well, me and Bob will be sure to let you know. And that is in addition to a giant back catalog. We are closing in on 3 years of What a Cartoon Movie premium podcast. So I'd say over 120 hours by my count of exclusive podcast in addition to everything else. If you go to that $10 premium level at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons.
And if you've never signed up for Patreon before, it's so easy to do. And once you sign up, you're given access to a code. You can access that code whenever you want. And you just drop that code into whatever you use to listen to podcasts. And that way you can download our bonus podcast alongside your free podcast as part of your podcasting lifestyle. And Patreon also has an app for any smart device you might have, so you can download that as well and listen to our bonus content that way. But either way you do it, it is so easy to access all the bonus content waiting for you at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. That's it for this break. We'll let you get to the slightly horny adventures of the Savage Dragon.
Chicago. A criminal mastermind called Overlord held our city in his terrifying grip. Ordinary cops were losing the battle against Overlord's super freaks and mutants. Then, a miracle happened. When I found him, he had no memory of his past. I helped him find an identity and a life. Now we have a fighting chance. Now we have the dragon.
All right, we are back. You just got to hear the original Savage Dragon intro song, too. Very forgettable, but I will say that opening dialogue is like almost stripped straight from the pages of the first issues.
And I needed closed captions for it because it's very muffled, at least on my audio setup.
Frank was trying to tell you about how the dragon just appeared out of nowhere in a ball of flames.
This naked man on fire. I like that at the beginning you get a naked man.
I'm always surprised, even when they redid it in the anime opening for season 2, still nude. Like, I have to say, it is a key part of Dragon's origin. He knew Dragon's origin the whole time, but he waited like 10 years to reveal it, and he did it in a comic you had to pay $100 for before he finally
What?
It's very weird.
Okay.
They did this hardcover called like that was for like Image super fans of like exclusive comics only that you can only get here, and they seriously were like incredibly hard to get. So I never knew his origin. I think that was one of the main reasons I dropped off as a Dragon reader. I'm like, I gotta spend this much to read his origin story after this. But yes, this episode, She-Dragon, written by Henry Gilroy, writer on both seasons, lots of kids credits.
Any relation to Henry Gilbert?
No.
Okay.
We spell and pronounce it differently.
I see.
But yeah, he'd worked on What a Cartoon favorites like Batman the Animated Series. He wrote one episode in the first season. Seems like wasn't a favorite of Bruce Timm, or he'd stuck around. Wrote 2 episodes of The Tick, House of Mouse, Clone Wars, lots of Marvel stuff. Still active, according to IMDb. As for the director, that's a really confusing one. Like, it's buried in the credits. You got to pause real fast in Peacock. In season 2, they at least get the director credit on screen at the start.
That is nice, yeah.
They screwed the directors in season 1, but the director is credited to Robert G. Yap. If he's the same one as other IMDb credits, he has mostly board credits. He worked on Freakazoid and Rugrats.
Okay.
And also Arthur. Not sure what he's up to these days. Not on Twitter, not on LinkedIn. Can't find anything about this mysterious Canadian animator. And I'll also say, as an adaptation, She-Dragon is interesting because in the comics, she is a parody of She-Hulk. And
okay, because I was getting some real, is there going to be a lawsuit vibes to this character?
Well, honestly, I think if I know Eric Larson, he thought She-Hulk was a lame introduction of a character. Like, if you know the behind-the-scenes stuff, She-Hulk was created by Stan Lee because he knew that a knockoff girl version of the Hulk could be created and be legally distinct unless Marvel moved fast and published their own She-Hulk comic first, and so they did.
I just like the unimaginative name. So is She-Hulk okay with everyone?
Yeah, She-Hulk.
Yeah, it's good.
That's why I like the running gag in this episode. Like, well, if she's She-Dragon, then aren't you He-Dragon? Like, Hulk is not a gendered term.
He should just be called He-Hulk, like He-Man.
Yeah. Also, I love She-Hulk. She's one of my favorite comic characters.
What's the hook with She-Hulk? I know people are horny for her. I get that.
Sure,
but
yes.
what else is going on with the character?
Well, when they realized that they could do a lot more fun with her, she got to star in these very winking, fourth wall breaking comedy comic books that I actually did really like as a kid. Of course, the ones drawn by Pervo John Byrne also involved her getting naked several times that I was like, all right, John, come on. Like, but Dan Slott wrote a slightly more respectable version of her as a lawyer story. It was basically a law procedural, but starring She-Hulk, about the Marvel Universe, which I'm hoping that's what the Disney Plus show is going to be when that finally comes out. But so She-Dragon in the comics is a parody of that. In She-Hulk, they instantly legitimize her as Hulk's cousin, and she's like, yeah, she's my friend. In this case, in the comic, much like in this episode, She-Dragon in the comic shows up. She's like, yeah, I'm She-Dragon. And Dragon's like, you're not affiliated with me. Go away. You're not a cop. Get out of here.
It feels like does he know his origins, or does the audience not know?
No, but she's not from his origins either.
Okay.
That's also, she's just a green lady who likes
It's
him.
weird. There's another person like me with the same kind of feature. Shouldn't I be asking more questions about this, or hanging out with her?
He's very disinterested in that in this cartoon. In the comic, he knows immediately her origin and knows they're not related. And the show does it slightly, but in the comic, she is written as a joke character who is an insane stalker of Dragon who only gets in the way. She isn't given a win at first in the comics, or little dignity at all, really. Like, she spies on him from binoculars and watches him have sex. Like, she's weird. But eventually they kind of retcon that to like be, oh, she was mind controlled by something or whatever. And she is turned into an actual character that people like, and a badass who also has her boobs flying out a lot of the time too. But she's eventually becomes not a joke. This episode does it very quickly, where she's a joke for like 3 minutes and then eventually gets Dragon's respect.
There's a tragic backstory.
Well, she has a tragic backstory in the comics too, but it involves a physically abusive father, which, I mean, that was the thing back then in comics too, of like, oh, it's a serious comic if horrible things happen to lead characters in it. That's what happens when people read Alan Moore comics and just thinks like, oh, it's Alan Moore comics. Mature comics are about horrible things happening to a person on screen. That's how it's grown up.
They have to realize it's a spice you use sparingly in your stew.
But She-Dragon in the comics, also a ton of cheesecake on her. Like,
wowzers. I'm looking at Google image search.
Are you looking at the cover to Savage Dragon 40?
There's like a naked statue of her, but yes, I'm also looking at that one, and boy, her costume is teared into too many tatters.
Yep, yeah. How convenient, right? That it's just in that one area. Yeah, but so yes, She-Dragon is much more respectable in here. And we get the opening with Frank Darling talking through what happened to him. We get to see Overlord, who is very much a Doctor Doom knockoff. It took a long time before they made Overlord anything more than that.
So, questions for you. Does Overlord just hang out with these three guys? And they're all, it's part of the same organization or something?
He's more like the kingpin of crime for all freak criminality.
But they live in the sewer.
Well, they have like a bunch of sewers that lead to other legitimate businesses. He lives in a big building.
Because you mentioned that there's a Ninja Turtles connection, and I was like, wow, they're in the sewer a lot in this episode.
Also, it being targeted as a toy line reminds me of Street Sharks being targeted as a toy line. The way you could sell a toy line to somebody is like, these are for boys and they're weird animals. And so Savage Dragon is pretty much that too. But yeah, no, Overlord, he's also a lot of Shredder, but his thing in the comics, and touched on in this a bit, is that he's a legitimate businessman that the cops can't touch, and they're too scared. I mean, also the comic and the show rip off RoboCop quite a lot too. Like the way all the freaks talk to each other, like, I hate cops. Yeah, cops. I kill. Like, that's all of the villains in RoboCop.
They're in the crime business.
Yeah, I love crime. Crime's the greatest. But yes, then the opening ends. We come down on the characters on a stakeout, Dragon and Alex together. I do like that they do try to set it in specifically Chicago, which is the setting of the comics too.
That feels like, I mean, Chicago's a big city, but it's very low stakes, where Overlord's like, soon I will rule Chicago.
It does, right?
And some of the suburbs.
It was an interesting choice because, every DC comic is in a made-up place like Gotham or Metropolis. Every Marvel comic basically is based in New York City. So you can see why he's like, okay, it's a real city, but not New York because everything's in New York.
I bet Overlord has a nice house in Schaumburg.
He lives in the suburbs for sure, yes, yeah. But But yes, the villains you see on screen who are waiting there, they all have names. They're all from the books. You've got Mako the Shark, Doubleheader the Two-Headed Man.
I correctly guessed that guy's name without even knowing it the second I saw his stupid design.
And also, his whole head layout is just a ripoff of the Hulk enemy Bi-Beast, who is a two-headed thing but stacked up. And yes, people have made the joke of him being called Bi-Beast.
Darn.
Yes. Other guys' names, if you see that guy with like purple stuff on his face, that's Cyberface. The little person is known as Low Blow, and the large guy with the black mask, that's Brawn. So also on the show, but not in this episode, is a character named Mud, who is a big goopy man who throws his goop at you. And would you believe in the comics, his name is actually Dung, and he is a living pile of shit.
But they do put him in the cartoon as Mud.
Yes,
okay.
they actually put him in there. And
Ooh, a living pile of shit as a villain. That is so Image 90s.
it so is, yeah. It beat, and you know Kevin Smith was reading those Savage Dragon comics, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, come on.
We all know the shit monster in Dogma.
Also, in season 2, they improved the look of Alex because she is just drawn as a white woman here and voiced by a white actress, but in the comics, she is meant to be Hispanic. And also drawn to look a lot like Halle Berry. I also found out that over time in the comics, the two characters would have sex, but in a friends with benefits relationship.
Okay.
Like, leading to, again, many other pages. I'm like, Jesus Christ. And put both hands on the table, Larson.
That can be a separate comic, right?
Yeah.
Can I opt into that?
I was shocked that he had never done a full-on, like, hey, here's a $20 R-rated comic. Just pay me for that, and I'll draw full penetration for you guys if that's what you want.
That feels more like a Japanese market thing where it's like, I'll sell this separately
Yeah.
on the side.
You know, others of his guys, Jim Ballant, who was the Catwoman artist of the sexy Catwoman comics of the 90s, he actually did it. He, in about 2009, he's like, I'm just drawing porn. You know what? I'm drawing porn and selling it to you guys. But yes, enough porn talk. She-Dragon shows up and ruins the stakeout.
Guess we blew that one, huh?
All right. Who are you and what do you think you're doing?
I'm She-Dragon, aspiring crime fighter and really big fan of yours.
I'll just get the car.
What are you guys so uptight about? You could at least say thank you.
Say thank you? Listen, kid, you're lucky I don't throw you in jail for obstructing justice. Now go home.
Look, maybe I'm not a real cop, but I'm a fast learner. Maybe you could train me and make me your partner.
I already have a partner. And from now on, you leave the crime fighting to the police. Let's go, Alex.
I was just trying to help.
Dragon has a fan. How cute.
I don't think it's cute. What she did was stupid and dangerous.
I wonder how it felt for Kath Soucie to play an adult woman for once in a show.
It had to be something new. I guess
and not a mom either.
The closest she came to playing that was a sexy computer in Sonic the Hedgehog.
Yes, yeah. I guess Sally Acorn is adult-ish.
She's got to be a teenager.
Yeah.
But that was Jennifer Hale. I recommend you check out our Retronauts episode. We interviewed her for an hour about her voice roles.
That's awesome. Yeah, and she is perfect casting for She-Dragon because she has this youthful energy. It's just like, I'm only here to help. Come on. Oh, I'm sorry, partner. Like, she only hits on him a little bit, too, but she's not as sexually attracted to Dragon as She-Dragon is in the comics. But I'll say also, in the comics, every woman wants to have sex with Dragon.
Yeah, and having spoken with her, the actress, and knowing more about her, she's a very outdoorsy person and doesn't really watch TV, is kind of like hippie-ish in some pleasant ways. These were the kind of roles that she was rolling her eyes at, but still she needed to work. So she was just like, I'm just playing all these women with gigantic tits and all these stupid shows. And you can hear more about that on our interview with her.
And I like She-Dragon shows up, ruins the stakeout. The guy drives away. Watching it closely, you can definitely tell they had no money for retakes on action stuff because it's like there's like a fraction of a second missing from like any impact or even just people tripping over each other. I'm like, what got cut here? It only makes it less clear what's happening.
A lot of things don't make visual sense. In a later action scene, there's one beat that ends a fight. It makes no sense because they can't show what they want to show you, or the footage came back poorly and they couldn't do a retake. So what happens is implied, but it still doesn't make any sense.
Even in this one, it's like, you don't actually see Dragon land on top of She-Dragon, or when the car drives away, the smashed in window has switched positions. Like there's even when he like picks her up and says, "Hey, get down," like physical space is really lost a lot in this. Also, man, that soundtrack, the background music of it just sounds like the USA sound.
Yeah,
you know?
just like cheap and hollow and just there to make noise.
Too,
yeah.
And I looked up composer Sean Clement, worked on lots of shows. He worked in the first season of Buffy, and believe it or not, actually did work on some Skinamax as well, which fits with that music. Yeah,
dust off the sax.
But the way it's played, Jennifer Hale and Jim Cummings are really good together. Like, she is this like chipper young person who's like, "Hey, you can at least say thank you," and him trying to contain his rage at her.
I do like that little reading of him going, "Say thank you."
Yes.
He's just trying to keep it under control.
Yeah, he's like, "Look, kid." And also, though, it's a very important point in this show that, like, and this was more of a point in the comics, Dragon hates superheroes and vigilantes because they break the law. He is very much like, "No, I'm a cop. If you want to do stuff, be a cop like me." That is Dragon's stance in the show as well, but not as harsh. Also, when I see all the cars driving around, it also looks like the kind of sort of future of RoboCop. Like, cars are sleeker and everything.
Yeah, I was wondering about the time period. Is this the not too distant future?
Well, the comics always are now and actually go in real time. Like, characters have aged into adulthood in the comics. So, of course, Savage Dragon, thanks to his powers, is kind of ageless. So he doesn't have to be drawn as older.
Pretty convenient.
Yeah. And yes, you see, not only do they drive away, but also there's almost no time to breathe as you see that She-Dragon arrives in a taxi after they follow that van. Like, you see it for a fraction of a
I don't know
of a
if that's supposed to be funny, but I thought it was very funny.
It's
of her getting out of a taxi.
Yeah, it's like, "Oh, she's in a taxi. Okay." And then just Dragon go like, just great. I had another giggle in they're chasing a van through a mall. Like, that's very silly.
I like how the van driver gets freaked out when he sees her leaving the taxi. So, of course, he drives into the mall.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
That'll
his
cover for him.
I mean, it makes for a fun action scene, but I'm like, why did you do that?
I also had a big giggle at this giant novelty hammer that he saves her from. It's like, "Hey, look out." Punch him.
That was made out of cheap plastic, if anything. It wasn't an actual hammer.
I guess it'd knock her down, I suppose. But it's also very loose in the show if she actually has powers like the dragon or if she's just like a really good gymnast. You know, they're not clear on that. But yeah, they fight their way through the mall. Dragon again, like, just does a very poor shot of him saving the van from falling over an edge. Like, you don't even see him grab the van. It just kind of cuts to him pulling it back up. There's just missing moments in all of it.
Yeah, the action is hard to follow because of that.
Yeah, but at least the dialogue's pretty good. As again, Dragon gets interrupted by She-Dragon as he's trying to interrogate the guy.
I've heard of shop till you drop, but I think you're overdoing it, partner.
Well, you know me. Can't resist a midnight madness sale.
Bet you're glad you're wearing that seatbelt, huh?
Let's see what kind of goodies this guy's transporting. Empty? All right, creep. Where's the merchandise?
Yeah, where's the merchandise, creep?
Come here.
We caught him, huh? I mean, I really made up for what happened to that.
Okay, She-Dragon. Maybe I didn't make myself clear before. So listen carefully. Your crime-fighting days are over. Do you realize how badly you could have been hurt?
Oh, don't worry about me. I'm tough.
I don't care if you are tough. You interfere again, I'm throwing you in the slammer. You got it? Now, go home.
He gives her like 7 strikes in this episode.
Yes, yeah,
This is the last time.
Original Dragon like literally arrested her on the second time in the comics. It
sounds like they softened him a lot for the cartoon.
Well, because I think they identified that if he's as no nonsense as Larson wrote him, he's an unlikable person. But Larson can't really see that in the book because he's too involved. He's too deep in it. But yeah, I also laughed at I wrote this down. Thought like Dragon can never be off model in the show because his biceps can never be too huge. Like, it's just the way he'd be off model is if his legs got big. Otherwise, his arm is twice the size of his head. No, that's intentional. That's
we were
off
talking
model.
about that before the podcast, in that this was the era that no one had leg day. It was all just the upper torso was huge and just like little spindly legs underneath.
Yeah, that was like, well, I mean, the posters for Arnold movies were about showing off those biceps or like
the pythons.
Yeah, the pythons pythons, the 24-inch pythons of Hulk Hogan. Yeah. Nobody thought about the legs or even the gut on guys. Like,
You can just put a giant wrestling belt over that.
it's funny, too, that for as much as he embellishes some things about Dragon, he never draws him with like a good butt or a large bulge or anything. Though, believe you me, if you read the comics, women say often he has a large penis. So it's a running. Also, when Larson had Dragon's son take over the book, he then literally drew a step-sister porn story for his that character.
Oh
to
my
engage
God.
in.
Really?
He
Oh, jeez.
the Malcolm Dragon, Dragon's son, has a cute young girlfriend who he's going to marry, but he also has a stepsister, no relation to, but did grow up with her. And then his girlfriend talks them into having a 3-way, which then expands to a 4-way. And so,
Oh my God.
yes,
Is he just basing comics on what's popular on Pornhub? Is that what's happening?
Or what he's driven to. Maybe he had just
Okay.
discovered, like, oh, step-sister porn. Huh. Like, it's weird. That was what he did for Savage Dragon 200. Savage Dragon 200.
What a
the
way to
threesome.
ring in the 200th issue. God.
Everybody was making. I think it's one of those things too, where it's the drill tweet of like, "Oh, keep making fun of my threesome porn. It'll only get pornier." But
But you're
anyway.
my step dragon. All right, I'm done.
Meanwhile, the writers on this show, I think we're actually trying to do more of a realer cop show with this interrogation scene. Like it plays pretty straight of just like this would be in a Law and Order, this kind of exchange here.
One more time. Where is the merchandise? Who are you delivering it to? All right. You're looking at charges of reckless endangerment, property damage, and a half-dozen other crimes. You cooperate, things could go a little easier.
How's our Nightingale?
Well, the only song he's singing is The Sounds of Silence.
This is what he had on him.
You know, somehow you don't strike me as a smoker.
Hey, I want to talk to my lawyer.
The Ancient Doings.
What's that? Is this some kind of a code?
No, it's a new art gallery downtown specializing in Egyptian antiquities.
Dragon, I didn't know you were into art.
Well, I dabble. Anyhow, my bet is that the Ancient Doings is where he was going to make the drop. Right?
I don't say nothing till I talk to my lawyer.
Only one problem, Dragon. We don't have the merchandise.
But we do have the van. I say we find out who wants the merchandise.
Well, what are we waiting for?
The sweet sounds of silence.
So many S's in that.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of edgy to have a matchbook in a kid's cartoon.
Yeah,
And just to have something
yeah.
written on a matchbook feels like something out of the past. There are no matchbooks anymore.
I mean, that probably was written by a guy who was like born in the 50s. I don't
Yeah.
know Gilroy's age, but it's just a throwback to like Dragnet. They're like, well, in Dragnet they'd find a matchbook from a place. I mean, also saying like, the only song he's singing is The Sounds of Silence. Also, kids, do ask for a lawyer instantly. Do not talk to cops.
Yeah, even if they're giant green dragon men.
Yeah. The first thing you do is ask for a lawyer and then say nothing else. Cops, it is legal for cops to lie to you. So just, anyway, yeah, this is an FYI. I do like the little, as a cop procedural scene, it's a fun scene of the interrogation. And in general, I like, they write Alex. She is a damsel some of the time, but she also is her own person and is not a joke of a cop. She actually is good at her job at being a cop.
Yeah, when they split up, they show she is pretty competent.
Yeah.
Even against super mutants. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
super freaks.
Yeah, the freaks, Bob.
They're super freaky.
Mutants are a legally distinct term for Marvel, so you got to call them freaks.
I get it now.
I think you can say like, hey, get away from me, you mutant. But if you have a distinction that a group of people are mutants, that is when Marvel Legal will get
A
involved.
recognized class of mutants.
Yeah. So they go undercover. And again, very poorly told through the executed animation, but it's an okay joke that She-Dragon is just holding on to the back of it, and that's how they know it's a sting and a trick.
She is sideshow bobbing her way into this sting.
Also, another like weird animation thing is when you see the dragon is in the back of the van, there's no sense of scale. Like he looks like 2 feet tall in the back of this van.
And then when he eventually busts out of the van is 6 times smaller than him, it seems.
Yes, yeah. It's also just the silliness of how he slightly opens the door and her face is right there, and he's like, great. Like scale is one of the worst things this show is at, which is funny because it's about dragons.
I see.
Anyway, though, Susie is really good at playing Alex, like being excited about this stuff and fun to go undercover. But they're caught. It goes to commercial break with all of the freaks attacking them. She gets electrocuted and knocked out by Mako, who also very funnily pulls the steering wheel out of the car. I feel like that's written in the script of like Mako pulls the steering wheel out to stop it, but when in animation, it just looks weird. And they start shooting rockets at the van. Dragon busts out of it. Did you note the doubleheader does have 2 voice actors, a different voice actor for each head?
Oh, I didn't realize he had dialogue in this episode.
Oh, you know what? I watched another episode where he talked. I don't think he talked.
There might be like some shouts in this episode from him, but I was waiting for him to talk. Boy, that character's stupid.
I also didn't expect Mako to be the leader of them, I guess, but he's the Starscream of this show. I also think it was maybe meant to be a red herring that like, oh, it's at this Egyptian museum. Egypt has nothing to do with this, and they're not like fighting a mummy or something. It's just a place they met. But yeah, they blow everything up. They escape with Alex. Dragon is freed out from under the rubble. He saved She-Dragon, and he is still pretty pissed off.
Come on. Nobody could survive that.
You saved my life. Thanks.
Well, no thanks to you. Your meddling got Alex kidnapped.
Well, excuse me. If you'd let me work with you in the first place, this never would have happened.
Work with me? For what possible reason would I ever let you work with... That's it. You're out of here. Go, vamos. Hasta la vista.
And how am I supposed to get out?
I don't care how you... Wait, that's weird. The exit's blocked. And the limo's still here. Which means the crooks never left.
Wow, you are good. I love the way you do that.
Something that confused me, was that limo mentioned before or shown before?
No, I don't think that limo was shown before. Well,
I guess it's inferred the criminals got there in the limo, but show it. If the limo's that important.
Maybe for 2 seconds it's visible when the van pulls into the place, but nobody says like, oh, there's their limo or whatever.
And they were already there waiting for the van. It doesn't mean, I don't need to know how they got there. It's weird that they have that as like a clue or something.
I at least like that they tried to have some sort of detective work happen where Dragon goes like, okay, they are still here, so I can look for a secret exit because they didn't leave through the front door. Like, it's sort of like a detective work.
It's the biggest villain goof up to say, no one could survive that.
Yes. Well, the dumbest
Let's
thing
never
you can
check.
say. In the first episode, Dragon survives a gigantic explosion that they all go like, man, I can't believe he survived that. So Mako should know by now that you need to actually like tear Dragon's head off and see it and be like, okay, I know he's dead now. And yeah, so there's some funny bits too of him punching through the door and then going like, no cause to be subtle.
I love his crime-solving abilities, punching through walls.
I also actually do, from a storytelling script standpoint, I will compliment that at the beginning of the episode, it could be seen as too easy that they're like, oh, some anonymous tip sent us to this. But they actually do justify that She-Dragon knew about this and she was the anonymous tipster. I actually like that.
It is pretty clever for a cartoon of this caliber, I will say that.
Yeah, and no one would have noticed if they didn't. So, I mean, that's not bad scripting there. I do like, though, that they just like, oh, I tore a hole in the wall and stairs are right here. Let's take a walk. And yes, they decide they're going to be partners here very tentatively. Then we get to see them, Mako going through a glass elevator, meeting with Overlord underground. Why don't we just hear Overlord's evil plan?
I got the merchandise.
Finally. And Dragon?
He's pancake mix.
The Belcher code-breaking chip. I've waited years. A chip so powerful, I'll have total access to the city's computer network. Computer, initiate codebreaker.
System connect. Decode has begun.
Banks, City Hall, even the police will be able to hide nothing from me. Information is power, and that power will allow me to rule Chicago.
That's not all. Look what else I got.
You monosyllabic buffoon.
That's good, right?
You bring a police officer here? Of what possible use could she be?
I thought maybe we could torture her.
Dispose of her quickly, before I decide to torture you.
I never get to have any fun.
Torture was a lot more fun in 1995.
Yeah, well, because you didn't think of America doing
No,
it to
of
people.
course not.
Yeah.
It's great to hear Tony J, but have a filter over that beautiful voice. I can't deal with it.
Well, it's actually pretty similar to the filter he has on him in Reboot, but it at least makes more sense there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tony J is just playing this straight down the middle. They're like, no, you're Overlord. You're like the most evil guy. Is there anything else to me? Nah, not really.
You're like a
then.
different Skullmaster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's so much better in Reboot as the big bad there, and has a lot more stuff to do and evil things to say. Here he's just like, I wanted that chip. You won't get away with this, dragon.
The idea of ruling Chicago is very funny to me.
Yeah, you're right. Every time he said Chicago, so wouldn't it let him rule the whole world? I guess, he's Chicago first, then the greater Chicagoland area, then Illinois, and then onward.
He's being pragmatic. I like that.
Also, I just love the weird saying of like, he's pancake mix, which is like, well, pancake mix isn't flat like a pancake. It's like a bunch of dust,
Maybe some other victim will be eggs, and they could just make pancakes later.
Yeah, but what, I guess it still works like, okay, sure, he got pounded into dust by it, but what he really wants to say is he's a pancake. But I also love the reply of like, that's good, right? Like he's an agreeable dude. Though also, all this torturing of a cop thing, this also feels like these dudes were watching RoboCop and Reservoir Dogs at the time, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's how you make your villains really evil. They torture a cop. And yeah, Overlord, just very no nonsense of like, just get out of here, you idiot. But just like Megatron, he's taken down by his poor subordinates,
He needs better hiring policies, I think.
does.
I want to talk about the next scene because Savage Dragon is going into this room and there are all these floor lasers.
Yes.
And so what She-Dragon does is she jumps across the room first and then jumps back to the wall that's next to the entrance.
Mm-hmm.
And then he does the same thing. And I was confused. Like, why do they have to jump across the room first to go sidle along the wall that's immediately next to where they're standing?
Yeah, wait, that doesn't make any sense.
Because like imagine you're standing in a doorway, there's a wall that's immediately to your left, and there's like a recess in that wall you can sort of sidle along.
Yeah.
They are jumping across the room first and then back into that recess in the wall.
Yeah.
For no reason.
That doesn't make, you're right. It's just for the flourish of the jump, I guess, but otherwise there's no reason for it.
For her, I thought, okay, she's showing off that she has these abilities. Okay, that's fine. The needless jumping is fine, but then he does it. And I'm like, dude, just step into the recess that's right next to you in the wall.
That doesn't, I bet it was just a note of like, in this script, they're just walking down a hallway and she tells him her backstory. No, at least have like some deadly lasers that are threatening them while they do it. But, well, too, you talk about holes in this. Not only are there these floor lasers, but also when she falls accidentally and then jumps the rest of the way, she acts like she's not in danger anymore, but she's drawn to still be standing on the same floor she just got lasered at.
She's faster than lasers, I think is what they're saying.
But when she does her like little like, ooh, ta-da, I did it stand, she's still standing on the floor and whatever. But this is, though, where we learn She-Dragon's backstory, totally different from the comic books.
Your dad was the most famous freak scientist in the world, on the cutting edge of computer technology.
Yeah, he was really something. The merchandise we're after is a microchip that he invented. The chip got stolen years ago, and according to an old associate of my dad's, recently showed up on the black market. I called you with the anonymous tip because I knew you were the one crime fighter who could get it back.
And you just figured you'd tag along, huh?
Yep. Figured it was my chance to learn from the best, and that's why. Those gymnastics classes paid off.
Obviously.
I do at least like the little bit that like his fingers kind of catch on a screw or something every now and then. He's like, ooh, ah, oh.
It's good effort acting as they're giving backstory, but also like, I'm moving along a wall. Oh,
Yeah. Both are pros. Like, well, it's funny too because Cummings is very established at this point by 95, but Hale's pretty new to this, but she's taken to it already. I guess, too, with the characters, they're actually in the positions of professionally Cummings and Hale were at the time too.
Yeah.
Dragon's more established and she's the new person, but showing a lot of spunk. And I like that their little exchange is fun. I also was just thinking, like, how many times has Jim Cummings played with his normal voice the lead in something like this? I feel like this is the only time. Like, if he uses his normal voice, it's like a side character, or if he's the lead, it's, you know, Winnie the Pooh or Darkwing Duck.
Yeah, this is maybe 15% gruffer than his actual voice is,
Yeah,
his
that's
actual
true.
speaking voice, but it's still pretty close.
But yeah, this little scene ends with them making it to the end of the hallway. Then we get to Mako threatening Alex. He says he's not just going to kill her, he's still going to torture her, which, you know, that makes him, again, like, listen to your boss, Overlord here. Like, just bite her head off and be done with it. But I was definitely, in this sequence of him letting her run through the sewers, I absolutely was thinking, like, did they just take some old TMNT backgrounds and just reuse them?
They're just digging through the dumpster.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we got one with 3 tunnels.
No one can prove this is an old one. Just change the color slightly. And this is another one of those, like, annoying things where the animation poorly tells a story. It goes to commercial break with her cornered. And then when it comes back, Mako lunges at her. She sidesteps it and then is running away in the opposite direction. Like, no, she was cornered. That was the threat of the last scene.
There was no clever twist about being cornered. It was like, oh, it turns out I could just stop being cornered. And I'm gone now. Goodbye.
I was cornered and then I just doubled back the other way. And then everything was fine. And also there's other missing beats here too, where, like, she trips and then instantly Mako is on the ground holding her foot.
Yeah.
And then he, like, opens his mouth and then it just cuts to her running away again. Like, there's missing stuff there.
Can this shark teleport and you're not telling us?
I don't recall him having that ability from the comics. I'm betting they needed a retake on some bit of action. Or maybe USA censors were like, oh, the shark can't bite this much or something. Maybe that. And then I just had a great, like, laugh at the ridiculousness of that big tube being put on his head. It should make an even cartoonier sound when it happens. And not only that, but then she gets the taser from Doubleheader, zaps them both, and kicks him in the face and takes it.
They seem pretty easy to dispatch. I mean, she just bumps into Doubleheader on accident, right?
Yeah, and he goes like, oh no, and she just kicks him in the face. And I do like, though, that she's shown is so together and cool that not only does she beat them both up off screen, but she leaves, like, a Men at Work sign on them as, like, kind of a cute joke for Mako to discover them. And so, yes, it's just down to her and Mako. Meanwhile, we get to see a very weird drawing of Dragon punching through a door and then pulling a lever to release the door. Then we get a bit of information that I'm sure will not be important later.
So this whole thing is about getting your father's microchip back?
It was his life's work, my legacy. He'd always say to me, Pumpkin, that was his pet name for me, you can't know your future till you know your past.
Nice sentiment.
Oh, sorry. I forgot about the amnesia.
Forget it. I did, Pumpkin. Now let's find Alex and take down Overlord.
Right on, partner.
Just don't call me partner.
It's a cute little exchange, and I like how she goes like, "Ooh, the amnesia thing." The voice acting gets pretty natural in this.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like it. Yeah. And clearly recorded together. Like, I mean, I guess I wasn't there, but it certainly sounds like it was recorded.
It does sound like they're
together.
playing off of each other, for sure.
Yeah, I would guess they were copying what was just the normal thing at the time in the 90s. Like, Andrea Romano, like, kind of led that change, but after all the 80s shitty voice acting, Romano and others who followed her pattern was like, no, these are radio plays and we do it with as many people together as possible. But yeah, then as they walk away talking about pumpkins, we cut to Alex and she's hiding from the killer. She bumps into a standee thing.
Yeah, what is that thing doing so deep in the sewer? The safety first cutout of a sewer worker?
Yeah, these sloppy Chicago sewer workers.
So she is spooked by this cutout, and then she uses it to trick Mako, who's very stupid, to think
Yes.
this cutout of a man is the same as the woman she's chasing, or he's chasing.
Yes, yeah. She very luckily bumps into a standee that is just stood up there to trick her and then uses it again to misdirect him. It's also, I was shocked, though, that her electrocuting him really, for this to be a complete story, the better way would be that she knocks him out and like, oh boy, Alex wins. She beats Mako. But she doesn't knock him out. He's like, ooh, that hurt. Anyway, she still has to be saved by Dragon. Like, it's unneeded.
It feels cheap that the dragon just shows up to punch him in the back of the head, because why was he running in that direction? He wasn't trying to find her, right?
How convenient that he just like, oh, hey, how do you like this? We just turned a corner and Mako's here trying to eat her. Yeah.
And this is another weird animation thing where he punches the guy, he punches Mako, Dragon does, and then he picks up Mako and throws him, and then Mako's cell is like pulled off screen. He's like, no! Yeah. And then Dragon says, and away go troubles down the drain. It's just like, well, no, I didn't see what happened to him.
Yeah, there's no drain. I didn't see him get pulled away.
And I honestly think there was a shot of Mako like going down in like a whirlpool, but it came back terribly or something.
It must have been that.
Yeah.
It must have been. They just, well, also like it holds on Dragon's face after saying that too long. That it feels like it must be cover for that. You're totally right. They wrote in the script, and then Dragon punches him into a whirlpool that's in the sewer and it sucks him away. And instead, out of the corner of the screen, Mako floats away, and it's like, no more Mako. He's out of here.
He floats away in maybe 18 inches of water that they were just standing. It was maybe knee high before.
And also, not to mention, in another bad animation bit here is She-Dragon is standing next to him when he punches Mako in the face from that drawing. Literally 7 seconds later, Alex is like, hey, where'd She-Dragon go? It's like, how far could she have gotten?
For a second, I forgot she was there with him.
Yes, yeah, she was there. I can't believe she just was able to run away there, but she did, and she confronts Overlord.
And away go troubles down the drain.
There you go.
Dragon? Where's She-Dragon?
You know, there's never a dull moment with that girl around. Come on.
System decode at 60%.
Overlord!
And who or what might you be?
The name is Amy Belcher. Sound familiar?
Dr. Sherman Belcher's daughter? Dr. Belcher was killed. No one ever found out who was responsible.
I've got a pretty good idea.
You've had a great impact on my life, Overlord. Now it's time I return the favor. But first, I want to know why.
Why your father had to be destroyed? It couldn't be helped. I needed the chip. He wouldn't sell. It was business.
My father's death was business?
That's the American way.
Yeah.
He's a businessman. He's trying to make it.
That is the most interesting thing they gave Tony J to do here. Of just, he has to plainly state like, yeah, I definitely killed your dad. I don't care.
Yeah, it's what I do, and it made me money, so fuck off.
Yeah, he wouldn't sell. I killed him. Though it's also funny that it's interesting censor-wise. Alex gets to say killed. He was killed years ago.
Yeah.
But Overlord says destroyed. So they should either both be killed or both destroyed. That one gets to be killed and the other not.
And I think there's a later use of kill after this.
Yeah. I think they mentioned he killed my dad or something too. Yeah. They also like Dragon getting to punch Mako right in the face at the start of that scene, like that. You couldn't do that on Fox or Kids WB. Like, that's the lighter USA standards there. Also, another great just chuckle I had at animation. She just moves her hand slightly off screen by like a few inches and pulls out a giant gun and points it at him. What a conveniently placed gun.
She has a magic bag.
And also, it's such a giant gun. It's a very Image Comics gun as well.
It's non-repeatable for children at home. Like, oh, I can't find a gun like that in my daddy's drawer. I won't try this.
My dad can't shoot lasers with his gun, so why even pick it up? But yes, when the lasers do nothing, then Overlord just turns into a Magneto ripoff of like, I'm ruler of all of the freaks, bow down to me.
And then there's another scene of Dragon sneaking up behind another villain and punching them.
You're right, man. He does. You know, I watched 2 other episodes that also they wrote that so many times where Dragon, they're like, no one will save you except me, Dragon. Punch! And he just punches into screen.
It's such a cheat. It's just like, yeah, that's how they get out of trouble. He just teleports in.
Well, I will say that it is true for the Larson comics that the main stuff Dragon does is punch people. He doesn't do much else. If he doesn't punch people, he is holding a giant machine gun that shoots people. One of those two things. But yes, as they say in Chicago, lights out, sucker. And he knocks him down. And also it's funny that he prevents She-Dragon from killing Overlord, because in the comics, as I explained with that Rat Man, Dragon beats people to bloody pulps and kills a whole lot of people in the comics.
I wrote this down in my notes when he stops her from killing Overlord. And he says, "That's a matter for the law." I'm like, yeah, you're a cop. You're allowed to kill people.
Yeah.
Go do it.
If he said, "Oh, I saw Overlord like grabbing for a laser gun, so I ripped his head off," no jury would convict Dragon.
We
the
can't
cop.
kill businessmen.
I guess maybe that's the one way he'd get in trouble as a cop, I suppose. But yes, as they do the classic cartoon thing of like, you'll be just as bad as him if you do that. But unfortunately, there's a not very explicit ticking clock. There's like percentages keep going up, but there's not like, we only have so much time. Maybe because there's going to be a ticking clock right after this, they're like, well, we can't have 2 clocks.
I wish they gave him more than 20 seconds because that does not feel like enough time to do anything.
Yes, first they need to find that old password.
If the microchip finishes decoding, Overlord still wins.
Well, can't we just tear it out?
No, that won't help. We need the override command.
The override command died with your father. There is no way.
System decode 90%.
He's wrong. There is a way. A password. I don't remember it. Think, Amy. Wait. Computer. Password, Amy.
Password invalid. System decode 95%.
Computer, password, pumpkin.
Password valid. Protocol reversed. Decode terminated.
You did it! You did it!
We did it.
Overlord! It's not over yet, dragons. Computer, begin self-destruct mode.
Self-destruct in 20 seconds. Prepare for detonation.
That Overlord, huh? What a knucklehead. Always has to get in the last laugh.
I suggest we get out of here. Pronto.
You have 20 seconds. Stop quipping. Get out.
They wasted 5 seconds. Fortunately, they're able to run across the room in 2 seconds
And
after
go
that.
up an elevator.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, this elevator will certainly be secure during a giant explosion.
And this is the same plot twist as the Stockholm Affair in The Simpsons.
You're right. Wow.
And in Darkwing Duck.
And in Darkwing Duck.
Kind of, where it's like, oh, the secret code was the same nursery rhyme he told his daughter.
The writers of these things are like, their kids don't know those twists. It's fine. The second she said pumpkin, if you have seen anything before, you should know that that's going to be important later.
Oh, yeah. She calls attention to it as if we wouldn't know it's a pet name or whatever, but it's like it's underlined a bit too much when she, quotes her father saying pumpkin.
Yeah, he's like, pumpkin? That's what my dad called me. And then Dragon has to say it back to her of just like, okay, pumpkin. So letting you know he remembers it. But as they separate from each other, I did count the seconds on this. So when it says 20 seconds are left, it actually takes 15 seconds for 10 seconds to pass.
Okay.
But when we see the 10 seconds left sign, it actually does legitimately take 10 seconds.
Why did they calmly go up this elevator as if it won't be affected by this explosion?
At the 10-second mark, when they're in the elevator, that's when She-Dragon runs away. They're like, wait, She-Dragon. It's like, guys, get that elevator moving right now.
I don't know what her plan is, and obviously she survives, but the chip is going to die. It's going to burn up or whatever. Like, what is her point? What is she trying to do?
Yeah, and it's not clear if she saved the chip or not anyway, but I guess it pays off in the next scene of her saying she's left behind her past, like exploding. This near-death experience in the explosion, which also they do not explain how she survived.
She should be dead.
She is seemingly not as tough as Dragon either. Like in those other explosions, he saved her. In this, she should have just been dead, and it's not explained why she isn't, but whatever. I will say for the budget of the show, the self-destruct explosions are all right.
Mm-hmm.
They're good explosions. And then, again, such weird editing. Very quick fade to black and back into the, give us a second to breathe with this.
I swear to God, these episodes are probably like 18 minutes long, right?
Yeah, because it's a 20-minute file on Peacock, and it's like a minute and then about 40 seconds at the end. So, yeah. But yes, we get a happy ending.
This is Dragon.
Hey, Mr. Dragon. It's me, your not-so-secret admirer.
She-Dragon, we thought we lost you. Where are you?
Close enough to call and say thanks for helping me realize that maybe it's time to let go of the past.
Because the future's where I have to live the rest of my life. I mean, look what you've done with no past at all.
Yeah, well, just don't let me catch you playing crime fighter again, young dragon. Or I'll have to arrest you for obstructing justice.
Hey, a hunk's gotta do what a hunk's gotta do.
Until the two dragons meet again. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Pumpkin. Something tells me we haven't seen the last of her.
You got that right.
He-Dragon.
Boy, Double Dragons. Think about it.
No,
Was Double
man.
Dragon in this block?
You know, I bet it aired at some points in this block, but I think it was like a year before
Also
this.
terrible.
This, by comparison, Savage Dragon looks a lot better if you watch a Double Dragon with it. It's also funny that last shot is supposed to be him doing like a big take, but he's just kind of like, it's a half open mouth, like, hey. Like that.
It's very muted. You're right.
If you're gonna do that kind of ending, at least have a bigger like, "Hey, come on," or whatever.
Do like a goofy like Scooby-Doo shrug at the end, like "Come on."
Also, her saying like a hunk's got to do like that. That is her being explicit. Like, I'm into you, Dragon. Like, I'm into older guys.
Oh, I have to apologize. Double Dragon is part of the Bobot universe of shows.
Oh, okay. It's similar but separate. The Bobotiverse. And yes, She-Dragon would return for several more episodes in the series. She was a recurring character. And up till the final episode, which the last episode is definitely written like a season finale. They sort of have him beat Overlord in a final type way, but it could also have been they left it open to a continuation. But yeah, and then the credits, again, in season 2, instead of using screenshots from episodes, they at least asked Eric Larson, like, can you just draw a Savage Dragon and we'll just put that picture against black? And they went with that instead. I think that's better than just any bit of animation from Savage Dragon paused looks bad.
You don't want to see it frozen.
Yeah. But a fun enough end to, a pretty typical episode of a kids action show. Lessons were learned, friendships were made, vendettas were overcome, and I at least get a little chuckle at her going like He-Dragon to him multiple times, be sort of playing on the sexist nature of the name She-Dragon. But I guess then again, it's what she chose to be called.
It's true.
Not everybody else is calling her She-Dragon.
Even though a man wrote that.
Yes, yeah. Hey, I guess you're right. It was fun to go back to this and have my Dragon comic book reading reminded to me. I don't think I'll be watching more episodes of this on Peacock, though.
I don't. They're just simply too much to choose from on Peacock.
Yes, yeah. I got to watch through all of Office one more time, and then of course 30 Rock. So, and there's a few fewer episodes of that on there, so it'll save me a little time.
But there's no censored episode of Savage Dragon,
far as I know.
Yes,
yeah.
And it was fun to explore, and I'm glad James brought this to us because
thanks, James.
I never would have interfaced with Savage Dragon. I never would have really learned about it. I wouldn't know anything more about it outside of his one appearance in the Max. So it was a fun trip to a world that was completely foreign to me. And you know what? This cartoon, probably the best cartoon in that block, I'm guessing.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think maybe we would have been more entertained rewatching Street Fighter to see the worst animation of the block.
Yeah.
But,
what? M. Bison typing with gloves? Sorry, Balrog typing with gloves, right?
Oh, yes, yeah. And the classic, yes, yeah.
How much of a weeb am I that I called him M. Bison, his Japanese name?
That's raw. Yes, that's crazy, Bob.
Mike Bison. But yes, thank you once again to James for being a mega patron and supporting this episode. And thanks to everyone out there. If you're a patron, if you want to be a patron too, please go to patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons and sign up at the $5 level. If you do, get all these episodes 1 week ahead of time and ad-free, and also access to everything behind the $5 paywall. That includes all of our limited miniseries. The one that's happening right now, it's currently unfurling behind the $5 paywall, is Talk King of the Hill Season 2 Part 1. That is 11 new episodes of Talk King of the Hill waiting for you, rolling out through the end of early summer, and you want to be on the Patreon to hear all of those as they happen. We also have a $10 level. If you sign up for that, you get all of the things on the $5 level, of course, but also access to one mega-long podcast once a month, only for patrons of that level or higher. And what is that, Henry?
You're talking about the What a Cartoon Movie podcast. You, as a listener on the free feed, have likely heard the extended previews we put out as a download each month, but you got to hear the full thing for often over 4 hours of conversation about theatrical animated films. Recent ones have included DuckTales, the movie, Whisper of the Heart, and this month, if you like us talking about green things, I'm going to say you'll love hearing us talk about Shrek for its 20th anniversary at the end of this month. So please sign up $10 a month at patreon.com/TalkingSimpsons to hear a giant back catalog of What a Cartoon movies, plus all that $5 stuff Bob just mentioned.
So I've been one of your hosts, Bob Mackey. You can find me on Twitter as Bob Servo. And my other podcast, by the way, is Retronauts. It's a classic gaming podcast all about old video games. Find that wherever you find podcasts or go to patreon.com/Retronauts for 2 exclusive full-length episodes every month. Henry, how about you?
Follow me on Twitter at HENEREYG. You'll get all your Henry Gilbert updates there if you follow me. And of course, if you're following people on Twitter, you should really be following the official Twitter account of the Talking Simpsons Network. That is at Talk Simpsons Pod. At Talk Simpsons Pod on Twitter is where you will stay up to date with new episodes of Talking Simpsons, What a Cartoon Movie, Talk King of the Hill, all of our stuff, and also announcements of new things coming to the Patreon or to the podcast. You'll always be up to date if you follow at Talk Simpsons Pod on Twitter. So please do that today.
Thank you so much for joining us, folks. We'll see you next week for an extended preview of our next What a Cartoon Movie episode all about Shrek, and we'll see you then.
One thing I ain't got no respect for. Easy prey. Game over, cop.